This is Mo, the Gnostic warrior, and we have author David Livingstone on the other line with us. How you doing today, David?
Good, thanks.
Great. And it's been a few years since we last had, talked with each other, and we did a great interview. You've written a great book since that time. But for those people out there that don't know who you are, David, can you give them a little bit of a rundown on your history, who you are, and a couple of your books and so forth?
Yeah, I'm a project manager in a web agency by day is my day job. And that's because I think the line of research I've decided to take, no reputable publisher is going to publish. I certainly don't have the kind of following that would allow me the kinds of sales that I could do this full time. So I have a dual life based on my day job and then this research that I've been doing. I've been doing it since I was about 23, so it's going to be 30 years this year. I started out in university. I grew up in Montreal, and I was studying history, and that's when I first discovered certain stories of history that to me sounded suspicious, and I decided to look into it, and that's when I first discovered what basically turned out to be the history of the Aryan race, or what's called Caucasians, in Western history. And it seemed odd to me. That's when I eventually discovered the influence of Freemasonry in that story, and I've since been trying to discover the true origins of it. So what's interesting about occult history is that it's not a subject that is treated in mainstream histories. So most of the material is from people who are partial to it. So basically, Masonic historians or other historians. And the problem with that is that their versions of history are mostly legendary and are designed to support their belief system. So the trick is that there's a degree of accuracy to it, but it points in the right direction, but of course it's not at all accurate. So it's been fascinating to follow the thread, and I've tried to trace it back right to its origins. And that's how I ended up writing my first book, which is called The Dying God, The Hidden History of Western Civilization. And so what I have done is I've traced the history of the Kabbalah, the Jewish Kabbalah, to Babylon in the 6th century BC. And the theory that I'm putting forward is that a group of heretical, basically the earliest Jewish Kabbalists were perceived by the rest of the world as being Chaldean Magi from Babylon, and supposedly followers of Zoroaster, the founder of the religion of Zoroastrianism. But they weren't in any way normal, conventional Zoroastrians. They were Magi who practiced magic, which is where the name magic comes from. And that's what they were celebrated for throughout ancient times. And their influence extended to Greece, where it resulted in the philosophy of Pythagoras and Plato. And that's really where the occult historians pick up on it, because those two are really sort of the godfathers of occult history, particularly Pythagoras. And then from there, it evolves into Neoplatonism, which is influenced or cross-pollinated with Gnosticism, and Merkaba mysticism, which is basically the earliest form of Kabbalah. And that evolved over time. It led into Sufism in the Islamic world, because what happens at this time is that Western history is explained as having undergone a period of a dark age, but what's actually happened is that tradition first enters into Islam in both the Ismaili movement and the Sufis. And the Ismailis, or particularly a group called the Assassins, then influenced the Templar Knights, and that's how, as well, according to Masonic historians, how that tradition then re-entered into Western history, Western culture. And so again, that tradition evolved over time into the Renaissance, the foundation of the Rosicrucians. Out of the Rosicrucians came the Freemasons. Out of Freemasons came the Illuminati. Illuminati, of course, is just one of many factions. I don't believe that they have the influence that has been accorded to them. I think that the Martinist movement was the most important. Out of Martinist movement, you get the Synarchists, and out of the Synarchists, you really get the modern variation of occultism. The leading exponent in our time is a guy named Alexander Dugin, who's known as Putin's Rasputin, and he was very much the architect of Russia's mission to have Trump elected by using fake news and tapping in to racist sentiments to build up his base of support.
And why Trump? Why was he specifically, in your opinion, in your research, why was he chosen to be that guy?
That's a very good question, and so there's two trajectories here. What's important is the history of fascism in the United States that has been sort of lurking in the shadows and creeping its head up every once in a while. They have had a long-term plan to hijack the Republican movement, and so, they've had varying degrees of influence, and they've exercised some pretty powerful influence at times, sometimes crossing paths with the neoconservatives. But really, their first success has been Donald Trump. And why they chose him, I don't know. But I mean, the thing is, when you look at Donald Trump's career, it's clear that the guy has the guy has no intrinsic talent or skills of his own. He's basically, his product is himself, and he sold himself as a business tycoon and as a deal maker. And but what's interesting is that his relationship with Russia, I'm not sure which way we can circle back to this, because the modern relationship that sort of converges between this right-wing faction within the Republican Party and Russian influence starts in 1987, when it starts with Trump's relationship with Ronald Lauder, who is the son of Estee Lauder. He is I think he's the head of the World Jewish Congress, if I remember correctly. He's also a friend of Arthur Finkelstein. And Arthur Finkelstein is the guy who was the main guru of the early Republicans of this faction, particularly Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. So that relationship goes all the way back to the 70s. And so Arthur Finkelstein has been, his group of proteges are known as Arthur's Boys, if I think that's referring to it properly. And most of them were members of the, the YAF, so Young American, I can't remember, Young American Public Republicans. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for. That's basically that's the Republican faction that comes out of the William F. Buckley's movement. Well, Skull and Bones, William F. Buckley. And so what happens is 1987, Donald Trump gets introduced to the Russian ambassador Dubinin. And sorry, a second.
Yeah, no problem.
And so the Russian ambassador comes to visit him to New York, and the first thing he does is he goes to Trump Tower, and he immediately takes the elevator and goes upstairs to meet Donald Trump. And then basically, this is what Donald Trump recounts in his book, The Art of the Deal, is that he then gets invited to Russia. So he goes to Russia, and I think it's in August 1987. And he comes back, and a month later, he announces that he is going to run for president, and the person who helps him coordinate that announcement, because he takes out, I think, a full page ad, and I think it's a New York Times, some New York paper, and he announces that he's going to run for president. The guy who's helping him with that was Roger Stone, who has been trying to basically get him elected ever since. The person who was mainly encouraging him to run for president was, of course, Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn is really the guy who is at the heart of this whole, I guess we could call it, conspiracy. Roy Cohn was also a member of Permindex, which is that organization which has been blamed for the assassination of JFK. He was once a director of Western Goals, which is really one of the primary organizations back in the 80s that was at the forefront of the fascist movement. It overlapped with the John Birch Society. Roy Cohn got his start. He was a member of an organization. This is really where it gets a start. An organization called the American Jewish League Against Communism. And they're the ones who basically, they were right-wing Jews. There's so many threads to follow here, but basically they were founded by, I can't remember his name, but he was a student of Stephen Wise. Rabbi Stephen Wise is a Sabbatean. There's, if you're familiar with the history of Sabbateanism, there's only several people who are known confirmed Sabbateans in modern American history, and that's Felix Frankfurter, the Warburgs, Judge Brandeis, and Stephen Wise.
And the Sabbateans, David, are they a specific family, a bloodline, a secret society?
Well, they're a little bit of both and everything. So they of course started with the announcement of Shabbatai Zvi in 1666. And so what I prove in my books, and I'm establishing even more firmly in my recent book, is that Shabbatai Zvi's movement was orchestrated by the Rosicrucians. And because there had long been predictions that the Messiah was going to come in 1666. This was based on interpretations of the Book of Revelation, which is a Kabbalistic book, and that's another tangent we can go back to.
Sure.
And so they basically orchestrated his not his advent, but his announcement or his mission. And then it was largely spread through Rosicrucian circles, particularly what's called the Hartlib Circle. And that circle will also happen to be in some of the early founders of the United States. So basically the Pilgrims, the Mayflower in particular, and John Winthrop, the founder of Massachusetts, of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, these were all, he was connected with the Hartlib Circle, and the early the leaders of the Mayflower voyage were also connected or belonging to the Rosicrucian movement.
And weren't some of these early, like the Rosicrucians, and then we had the Theosophical Society with Madame Blavatsky, right? The Russian Madame. Wasn't the Rosicrucian also had a Russian connection as well?
Later. So I mean, the Rosicrucians first announced themselves in 1614, 1619, somewhere around there, and effectively they're not even considered to be a movement or society, because mainstream historians will argue against the fact that they actually were a society. They were, the famous book on the subject is Frances Yates's book, and she's the one who kind of helped to confirm that there's something, where there's smoke, there's fire. There was something happening there. They didn't last very long. They were destroyed with the 30 Years' War in 1620. But how they reemerged is they reemerged as Freemasons. So they effectively didn't exist. There were sort of pseudo neo-Rosicrucian orders that emerged later, but they weren't, the same genuine Rosicrucians as there were before. But there was more particularly, what was active in Russia was the Martinist movement. And that's really where the activity was. And then in a lot of relationships with the Theosophical Society. So that was particularly a guy named Papu or Gerald Arcos, who was the head of the Martinist movement that was active in St. Petersburg. And that's really where all the characters sort of start. Those are the guys who were responsible for probably the production and definitely the dissemination of the protocols. And that's the book that is basically the key to understanding this whole story, because the way that this fascist movement is born in the United States is by those people who were principally responsible for first the dissemination and the translation of the protocols in the United States, and using the concept of a global communist Jewish conspiracy to sort of rally a right-wing movement in the United States.
And that was just basically a decoy, in your opinion?
Yes, it's basically it was a carrot at the end of the stick. It was it starts with a guy named Boris Brasol, and he was and a network of Russian white emigres. So these were anti-communist or supposedly anti-communist agents who were working simultaneously for the British. Principally, they were working for William Wiseman, who was the head of British intelligence. And he had a whole slew of characters, dodgy characters that were working for him. A very interesting guy is a guy named George Sylvester Viereck. And he was basically a sex pervert and a fascist and a Nazi supporter. He basically eventually became a registered Nazi agent in the United States. He was the guy that Alistair Crowley was working with in the United States for his so-called black propaganda. They were working for two German front newspapers called The Fatherland, and I can't remember the name of the other one. They were supposedly Crowley's excuse is that they were fake pro-Nazi in an attempt to sort of make fun of the Germans. Well, sorry, this was World War I, so there was no Nazis yet, but they were trying to mock it was kind of black propaganda where they're trying to make fun of the Germans, but it doesn't make any sense. So Boris Brasol, he comes to the U.S. and then he becomes friends with Henry Ford. He's the one who basically coordinated for to help Henry Ford translate the protocols. And as most people know, Henry Ford also wrote what's it called? The First International or something like that. The International Jew, I think is what he wrote.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
And so Boris Brasol's sort of circle founded what's called the Shinny Knights of Malta. Actually, let's back up first. So Boris Brasol was a member of a German society called the Aufbau, and mostly composed of white Russian anti-communists. The leading members were Dietrich Eckart and Alfred Rosenberg. And Alfred Rosenberg, of course, is like the chief ideologue of the Nazi Party. So these are the guys who mainly introduced anti-Semitism and the protocols to the Nazis. So basically that's how anti-Semitism basically became a core issue with the Nazi Party. So Boris Brasol then comes to the United States, and like I mentioned, his circle starts the Shinny Knights of Malta, which is basically a Masonic front or a pseudo order of the Knights of Malta. And this is now where this entire network really begins, and that's really the kernel of it. So out of the Shinny Knights of Malta, these are the guys who first perpetrated what's called a business plot. And that was a fascist plot to overthrow the United States government. And they had attempted to recruit former General Smedley Butler. And Smedley Butler is famous because he wrote a book called War is a Racket. But what happened is that instead, Butler turned on them and basically ratted them out. Nothing much came of it, but that entire circle, that plot was undertaken by a group called the Liberty League, and the Liberty League was sort of a business front that was funded by principally families like the DuPont family and a number of powerful, like the J.P. Morgan family. So principally supported and funded by these fascist-leaning, wealthy families in the United States.
And who are these White Russians? Can you explain who they are?
Well, there's a, I can't remember all their names, but Boris Brassall is the principal character. He's there. So the White Russians are basically the Russians who opposed the Bolshevik Revolution. But what's interesting is that for the most part, these guys all tended to be double agents. So they're working for both sides, and so they're working for the Bolsheviks and working for the British. A very famous guy is Sidney Riley, who's known as the Ace of Spies. So he was another one who collaborated with Brassall. And again, another one, he was Jewish, right? He was Jewish, born in Soviet Union, born in Russia. And but at the same time was an anti-Semite who was spreading this notion of a Jewish conspiracy. Boris Brassall.
And sorry to interrupt, David. Your knowledge is just immense, right? So for some people out there, it's kind of hard to. Yeah, well, I wouldn't say you're going too quick. It's just there's some key points that I'd like to just kind of brush up on, and something that people don't get is that how can we have two Jews that are opposed to one another, and this has been going on, since if we could trace it back to the time of Babylon, right? And that's what you trace it back to. So it's kind of the same dialect going on there. And if I remember correctly, the big group back then that was opposed or that fought was you had the Samaritans on one side. And again, I know this is a little bit different than what you're talking about now. So you had the Samaritans on one side, and then you had just the Jews on the other side. Would you consider these people to be in the lineage of the original Samaritans, or is this a completely new league and they just took over the game, took over the magic?
It's new, and it's Sabbatians.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So the thing about Sabbatianism is that, and this is what people forget. So today, Zionist propaganda is so thorough that people believe that Jews are a race, that Israel can actually be confused as a Jewish state. To be a citizen of Israel, you don't have to declare your belief
DNA or anything
in the Torah. It's basically your mother has to have been a Jew. So Judaism is, and that's the thing about Zionism, is that it's not a religious movement. It's a nationalist movement. So, for up until Sabbatians, until Sabbatianism, Judaism was a religion. It always has been a religion, and this is why it's so much in conflict with Orthodox Judaism. So. Basically, Sabbatianism is a heresy of Judaism. So the Orthodox Jews fought against it. They excommunicated them. And so for the longest time, in fact, I think the problem is that the Orthodox Jewish community underestimated the influence of the Sabbatians. So it's not until the 18th century that you get, it's principally Moses Mendelssohn. And Moses Mendelssohn, who was a member of the Illuminati, he was also a Sabbatian. And what's interesting is that there was a list of ordination that was found that had listed and anyone who's looking for this, Rabbi Entelman's book, To Eliminate the Opiate, is a great source for this. So this list of ordination is basically a list of the ordained successors of Shabtai Tzvi. And there's a whole list of them. A famous one is Rabbi Abishutz, but the next in line is Moses Mendelssohn. So Moses Mendelssohn is the father of basically what's called secular Judaism. So he's the one who invented the idea that to answer the Jewish question, because mainly until this time, Jews used to live sequestered into ghettos, and they were, by definition, they were followers of the religion of Judaism. And Moses Mendelssohn invented this concept that Jews didn't need to follow their religion anymore, that they could assimilate into the broader society. But the fact is, according to, in Judaism, if you leave the religion, you're not Jewish anymore. Right, you're excommunicated. You're just a German or a Frank or a French person or Englishman. There's no difference between a non-practicing Jew and anybody else who's any other kind of atheist or secular person. So this is how it's because of Moses Mendelssohn that you get the beginnings of this concept of the secular Jew, of Judaism as a national identity and separated from the religion. And that's what made the rise of Zionism possible, which basically was a nationalistic movement. So the thing is that's why for so long there was this antagonism between Orthodox Jews, and not to be considered confused with Hasidic Jews, which was another branch, and Sabbateans. And so they had competed for years, and the Sabbateans were considered heretics until they really slowly started to gain control of the Jewish movement. They were principally responsible for the creation of two movements: the Reform movement and the I think the conservative movement, the Jewish conservative movement. And these now are basically dominate in Jewish society. It's not so much in England, but particularly in the United States. I mean, there's a substantial portion of Jews are now Reform Jews. That doesn't mean they're necessarily Sabbateans, but they've come under the influence of Sabbateanism. So the problem is that this is how Sabbateans are basically anti-Jewish, and they have been from the beginning because they're battling against, traditional Jews. So so they resent the persecution that they had to suffer, and so on and so forth. So
Hitler would have been a Sabbatean.
Hitler appears to have been a Sabbatean as well, and most of the people in his circle would have been as well too. So that includes Alfred Rosenberg and and Goebbels and
David. It seems like if you were to look at all this, and I know it's just an immense, conglomerate of different organizations and factions and secret societies and political, societies and so forth. If you look at, they're literally taking different factions out with this kind of this chaos magic. And,
right.
I know the name of your book is Ordo ab Chao, Order from Chaos. So we're in that chaos stage.
That's right.
The end goal is order, correct?
Yes, their version.
their version, right? Not our version. Which sometimes I wonder, and I know studying this, it gets pretty stressful in this world. It doesn't seem like we're supposed to live like this, David.
Oh, absolutely not. No. This is a reverse. This is a Luciferian agenda. It's the mirror image of the truth.
Okay. Would you say that's why humanity is so stressed out? Depression, all the people self-medicating, all these different things. Would you say that deep down to the root of it, if we get down to it, I know we all have jobs, we got to make our dollar and all that stuff, and that's on top of everything, right? Would you say that this is the root cause of maybe our mental illness?
Well, we're all being tested. That's what it is. It's a test, and we're being tested individually, and we're being tested globally as a human community.
It's interesting you say that, David, because I was just having a conversation yesterday on a podcast with Philip J. Watt, and he's an author from Australia. And I actually asked him that same question, and he was like, "Hey, no one's really ever asked me that." He goes, "That's interesting." Because I look at what goes on in the media, and I look at this chaos, and I don't want any part of it. I feel like I could see through it, and I know what it does to me emotionally, because I've been a victim of the chaos magic, right?
Right.
So I feel like I could see it, but deep down, I want order. I want, like,
Absolutely.
okay, whoever it is, it even though I know it's their version, it's like, bring it on. Let's see what it is. What are your thoughts on what are the timeline? It seems like things are getting sped up. And so let's get into that part of it, and then also the apocalypse part of it, because I find that very, very interesting.
Well, that's one and the same, right? They're trying to fulfill the Book of Revelation. So the Book of Revelation is it's the blueprint, and this is why. So Sabbatianism follows the Kabbalah of Isaac Luria, and according to Luria, the whole point of Lurianic Kabbalah is that you don't sit around and wait for the Messiah. You have to work to bring about the conditions that will support or accelerate the coming of the Messiah. So if you apply that to the Book of Revelation, you'll see that as time proceeds, then things get worse and worse. And the Book of Revelation talks about, wars and rumors of wars and disease and so on and so forth. So as far as they're concerned, that those are prescriptions. Those are the things that they need to do in order to create the coming of the Messiah. So, it sounds strange to the most of us because it seems so contrary to our, basic moral compass. But these are people who have so thwarted their concept of divine service that they're Machiavellian, so that it's the ends justify the means. So they actually believe that by creating chaos, that they are fulfilling divine prophecy.
And obviously the Sabbatians and the people at the top, there's a hierarchy, right? So if we look at any animal kingdom, mammals, lions, there's always the pride, and there's the lion, and there's always the king, right?
Yeah.
And you see that everywhere. But when we look at the human kingdom, it's just a bunch of self-made kings, right? And
right.
We all know that those are puppets, and a lot of them are stooges and actors. Some think they're more than they are.
Yeah.
Are we seeing the wipe out of the chessboard kind of right now, as far as these people getting wiped out?
No.
Okay. Because they're needed, right? You need all these.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about people, the leaders that are being used to manipulate, or you're talking about the masses in general?
Not the masses in general. You have, of course, the leaders, and then you have like the politicians, right? You have the senators and so forth, and they kind of play the game as well. Is any of that going to go away, or is that all going to remain the same?
Well, the scariest thing yet is the election of Donald Trump. If anything confirms their power and their ability to deceive, Trump is it on a colossal scale, like beyond what I could have ever expected. And so when you look at the degree of his support, it's a very bad sign, because that's what it is. That is their strategy. He is the fruition of their years of work.
Is he going to have another term?
I think so. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. But I think so.
Let's talk a little bit more about the occult. You say something interesting. I have a quote here that I had written down. You said in your book, when we look at the influence of the occult history, not only a substantial influence on history, but a formative one. And I really like that, because I found that as well. So if we look at, you have the stories of Atlantis, and then in the Bible, we have the story of the flood. In the Bible, we have the story of the sons of God. And then, in modern mythology, we have ancient aliens and white gods. So we kind of see them go parallel with one another. So can you talk a little bit about the occult and how that has ran parallel, and it's been, there's a formative history that you could follow?
Well, so there's two aspects of it. So there's the occult side, and then there's the public side of it. So, as you mentioned, if you look at the occult side, it's this belief that Aryans are offspring of the sons of God who survived Atlantis and settled in the mountains of Asia and then spread to various parts of the world where they founded civilization. So, in the public side, you'll read that same story without that detail in any mainstream book that will talk about the conquest of the Caucasians, so the early Caucasians. So really, how occult history has formatively influenced our interpretation of history is that the entire concept of Western civilization is an occult influenced idea or narrative without reference to the occult, if you know what I mean. So basically, I mean, the first clue is that the history of Western civilization is presented as progress. And this is an idea that goes back to Isaac Luria. And the main interpreter of Lurianic Kabbalah for Western audiences is Hegel. So the story of Western civilization is an adaptation of Hegel's philosophy of history. And it's the idea that humans are evolving intellectually over time. And so that idea begins supposedly with Plato, who was the first to supposedly question traditional religion and pretty much invented philosophy. This is nowhere true. And, if you dig a little deeper and you see what they actually mean is that Plato was the godfather of Kabbalah. Plato was really the first to articulate to a broad popular audience what were originally Babylonian ideas. So from there, and so that's where begins the concept that Plato was the first to question the existence of God primarily, to begin this history of empiricism. And that evolved over time. We can skip several thousand years to right up to the Renaissance. So with Renaissance, you get the beginning of humanism, which again is another questioning of God. So basically it's and this is what Lurianic Kabbalah teaches, is that the history of humanity is the history of God coming to know himself, that man is God, and that man slowly over time starts to discover that he is God, until the end point in time is when man finally recognizes that he is God, that he no longer worships an entity outside of himself or any other entity, and recognizes that he is God. So basically Nietzsche's Superman, and there's no accident that Nietzsche came up with that concept. So that's basically that's how it has shaped our conception of time. That this is why we have secular societies. This is why we have secular governments. This is why we have separation of church and state in the United States, in France, in the Western world particularly, because it's this entire idea that humans do not need scripture, that humans are their own gods and write their own laws.
So this is the big test on humanity right now. It's what's your worth? Are you a god? Are you a beast? Are you a human? It seems like there's kind of different factions going on. When I look at my own path, I'm looking at to kind of perfect myself and to right my wrongs and kind of purge the evils and the sins.
Right.
I think I see that a lot, with a lot of people around me, and you see that kind of in the self-help movement. So you see these different movements, and people are kind of on their own, and they built this world too. Like it's like we have this medical system where it does a lot of good, but there's a lot where it doesn't, and it seems where it doesn't help people are those things where they kind of do it to themselves, whether it be alcoholics that ruin their. It's just like, hey, you're kind of on your own. You got to learn your lesson. I talked about a Gnostic world before, and you hear Eliphas Levi talk about that the Apocalypse of St. John, the Revelation of St. John, essentially is a Gnostic writing,
Right.
You hear about the Freemasons, Manly P. Hall. Essentially, Freemasonry is a Gnostic suppository of all the different teachings and knowledge from around the world, all the different faiths, all the different brotherhoods. They all molded them together in there. The letter G in Freemasonry signifies gnosis.
Right.
So this seems to be a Gnostic type of world that they're building.
Yeah. So I mean, fundamentally, you're talking about the existential angst that people suffer. The problem is because they don't understand their purpose in life, and our purpose in life is really quite simple. It's to do unto others. So to have a perfect world, we're never going to have a perfect world because humans are imperfect, but we should still strive to it. So, but the only way we can strive for a perfect world is by exercising compassion, and so that's how they're creating the opposite. They're creating a world that is based on selfishness. And that's fundamentally just what it is. But it has like immense ramifications. So I mean, that's basically it's how humanity is being tested. That instead of looking out for each other, it's a dog eat dog, and it's becoming more and more entrenched. Where selfishness is the accepted norm.
It is. I see that in the world. I'm in San Diego, the county of San Diego, and I have my own business here. And I mean, it's a dog eat dog world with business.
Yeah.
And then I see with my own sons, I have 6 kids and I have 3 grown sons, and literally it's hard to even talk to them because they're literally toiling for their own lives, their own path, and trying to figure it out. They don't have no time.
Right.
We don't even have time to talk and be a family. And I've noticed that at first I used to get offended by it. And then now I realize it because I take a look in the mirror at my own path and, what I'm doing. And, again, the things that I've done wrong. And I see that same message every time, with my children, with my little, I have a little 2-year-old, it's going to be 3 soon. His name's Archer. Yeah. And, he's really affected by that. So if I ever get upset or anything, he just will go, Daddy mad. Right. And and sometimes I won't really be mad, but my voice will change, and that literally that energy, he'll just reflect it on me.
Yeah.
And he makes me not want to be like that, Right. So it makes me want to be compassionate. And, I agree. And what we're seeing is kind of the testing of humanity. And I see that with politics. And if we get into that, politics has always been kind of a left versus right type of thing always, right?
Yeah.
What,
more recently.
Yeah, even more so recently. And I find, go ahead.
Well, it's neoliberalism. That's the core of the, that's why if you follow this fascist wing in the United States, they're backers of neoliberalism, and they are the creators of neoliberalism.
And that's for the people, though. They don't necessarily follow that themselves.
Well, I mean, in a way, they do. It's the system that they're creating. So everything. I mean, the Republican Party has basically become the party of neoliberalism. It's the World Bank, the IMF. The entire world economy is being shaped by neoliberalism. It's basically founded on the idea that the pursuit of self-interest is what's the best interest for the world, and that's how they're fundamentally destroying everything.
Sure, and I mean that's a satanic type of agenda,
right? There's no accident that Anton LaVey was a big fan of Ayn Rand.
Yeah. So
didn't he said something like the Church of Satan is Ayn Rand with ritual or something like that?
What about in regards to children and pedophilia? Does that have anything to do with this? I know you really don't get into that too much in your research, but is that tie into this at all? Tragically,
yes, and significantly as well too. So, you look, that's why, I get criticized so much for my criticism of Trump on my Facebook page. And because apparently Clinton ran a pedophile ring, and there's no regard whatsoever for his own friend, Jeffrey Epstein. And, but not only Jeffrey Epstein, Roy Cohn was basically connected to the Franklin cover-up, the Franklin pedophile scheme. What's interesting is that, I don't know if you know about Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil.
I do know of it, yeah.
Right. So he says that the Son of Man killer, what was his name? He attended a party at Roy Cohn's residence in Connecticut.
Interesting. So
Roy Cohn basically, and this is what these guys did, right? And there's a whole chapter in my book of all these people, and this is how it connects back to the Arthur's boys, the Roger Stone. It's basically it's largely a network of homosexuals, and this is what they call the German disease, right? It's basically goes all the way back to the Nazi Party. This persistent tie between homosexuality and fascism. So, Roy Cohn was tied to, as I said again, tied to that Franklin network.
Sure. And what do the Nazis play in it? Would you say that, I know, or I believe that Trump has a German ancestry. Is that correct?
Well, that's what he claims to claim, but it's not true. I think his ancestry is Swedish or something like that. In fact, he just said it again recently. He just tried to claim that his dad was born in Germany. It's not true.
Okay. Yeah. And then there was something I heard before that, Russian ancestry. But again, I know there's all kinds of different things that are out there.
And his dad was apparently a member of the Klan too. And this is why the Klan is really the thread that sort of ties all of this stuff together.
And why are we seeing the backlash against the young white male, and even the older white male? We're kind of seeing this, with, Jordan Peterson and, going across the country, and there's saying there are always a bunch of angry white males. Is that to get them riled up? Yeah, it's a dialectic. So, that this is really the kernel of the story. So it starts back in, first it's so important to understand, this is a major thread that I follow in my book, is that slavery in the United States was justified through what's called the curse of Ham. So, there's talk about racism, and it's just assumed that, people in the South or racists in general just don't like black people. But the fact is that they have what they think is a justification in Scripture for the enslavement and the inferiority of Africans. And so the curse of Ham is the idea that that Cain, who was Noah's grandson, the son of Ham, was cursed because of his father's transgression, and that supposedly Ham was the ancestor of the Africans, and so the curse of Ham applies to the Africans. And this was a justification that was originated in Talmud. So it was a justification that was used largely by Jewish slave traders who dominated the slave trade long before the Europeans did. And then the Christian slave traders then somehow adopted the same justification. So that was the basis of the enslavement of Africans in the United States. Those sentiments then got exploited. It starts with a Jewish agent Rothschild agent named Judah P. Benjamin, and in collaboration with the Skull and Bone Society, the Knights of the Golden Circle, and Albert Pike. And these are the guys who basically fomented the Civil War. They are the ones who cultivated this concept of states' rights, so that the federal government should
leave a degree of independence to the states, who should be able to decide their own affairs and not interfere with their enslavement or exploitation of Africans. And so that became the root issue of the Civil War, and basically created exploited the mindset that remained. So how Trump got elected is what's called the Southern strategy. And what's interesting too is what I trace in my book is that, so Trump's base of support is largely evangelical Christians. And I show in my book that evangelical Christianity was basically a crypto-Sabbatian movement as well. His main influence in the evangelical movement was a guy named Count Zinzendorf. And he was a German, I guess, mystic. And so he was largely influenced, but basically he was part of a network of Sabbatians, and it's his influence that caused you get two major movements in the United States called the Great Awakenings. And basically they were the ones that were largely influenced by really inspired the rise of the evangelical movement in the United States. So they are largely concentrated in the South, and they've maintained this sort of racist mentality. And so it continues to be a wedge that the right is able to use to gain support. And they've been doing that ever since they've been doing it. Well, I mean, they've been doing it since since Barry Goldwater, more particularly. So what I show in my book is that, when you look at the civil rights movement, it's all led by Black or African American Freemasons, principally Prince Hall Freemasons. So all those guys like Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, most of the leaders of the civil rights movement were all Masons and Prince Hall Freemasons. Some of them were in the same because they all go back to the Scottish right to the sudden jurisdiction, which was usually founded by Albert Pike, and he's the guy who's really the key character behind this all. Yeah,
and we still see Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton as well were involved in Freemasons.
Exactly. So that's why this tapping into, because when you look at the whole idea of a whiteness, it's a Kabbalistic concept. So the origin of this myth of an Aryan race is a Kabbalistic idea that was created by Illuminati scholars. So you look at guys like Friedrich Schlegel in particular. These are the guys who first created the notion of a European race. And what's not taught in the history books is that idea came from occult influence and was based on the idea that they were descendants of Atlantis. But there's also a merging of ideas of the lost tribes of Israel and Gog and Magog. So it's a bastardization. This is an important point. It's a bastardization of the concept of the chosen people.
Because they took it over.
Yeah. So, when you look at the emergence of the swastika, the swastika was first used by the Asiatic Brethren. So the Asiatic Brethren was an order that was created by Jacob Frank's nephew or cousin, Moses Dobrushka. So it is long been an identifier of the Sabbatian movement. It's racial.
Is this a symbol of their ancestors, or is this something that they had taken over?
So this is a part I can't really explain. I don't know why, but it's basically, yes, it's tied with this concept of an Aryan race and whiteness, purity of blood, blonde hair, and blue eyes, while also being a Sabbatian movement.
What's the story with the alien? I had a Russian author on the other day, and he claims that the white race is
offspring of aliens.
Yeah, a Martian race, essentially from Mars, is what he said.
Yeah, this is called a white gods theory. So that's what it is. It's always been like that. So that's what they're supposedly the aliens are supposedly sons of God, the sons of God of Genesis. Right. So supposedly, the Genesis speaks about the sons of God who take from the daughters of men and create a generation of Nephilim or Anakim. And so that's basically the origin. So the belief is that these sons of God are Lucifer and the fallen angels who interbred with human beings to produce the Aryan race.
And this is the core concept of their philosophies?
Yeah, so basically, if you look at the core of, Scottish Rite Freemasonry, that's why it's intertwined with the belief in the superiority of the Aryan race, and that's why it's fundamentally fascist. And this is why Nazism is just merely an extension, or one of the first brutal outward expressions of a belief that's pervasive. And this is why the backers of Trump are still feeding into that same ideology and are proponents of that same ideology.
Yeah, in this race, of course, Hitler, he was big on the blonde hair and blue eyes at the time.
Yeah.
I know going through history, there was this thing with a birthmark. Have you seen anything like that? I know I'm going off subject here, but they used to call it a king's mark, and they would actually, the Druids, the Greeks and so forth, they would examine the children for birthmarks, a special birthmark.
Right.
Birthmark would be tied to all these different emperors and kings throughout history.
I think it's probably the mark of Cain, if anything.
Okay.
That's what the whole concept, because it's supposed to be descendants of Cain.
That's what my research says as well.
Right. So Cain, of course, the Bible says that Cain received the mark, right?
Sure.
And as far as I understand, I can't prove this, but I think the mark is supposed to be the swastika. So it's just like what's his name? Manson had a swastika on his forehead as the mark of Cain.
Okay. And how does Crete play into this? Do you know anything about that island at all as far as history? I traced the Babylonians back to Crete, and I found artifacts there and different things, and you don't hear much about it. And I read about the Jews coming from there, from Mount Ida as well, and it being kind of the center, the navel of the world. And then, it was hotly contested for literally 2,000 years. It was, different wars and so forth. And then all of a sudden it kind of just disappears from planet Earth. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. All right. And let's talk a little bit about the Freemasonry and how that ties into all of this. The Freemasons, you don't really see them involved in much anymore as far as being active or any high-level Freemasons.
Yeah.
What's going on with them?
That's a very good question. I have absolutely no idea. I can't explain it. I mean, the thing, that's the trick, is that all this stuff is secret, right? So
yeah,
no one's going to tell you anything, and none of it's published. In fact, I asked some Masons once when I was at a Masonic museum, and I tried to get some clues, and they said, just Google it. It said it's all out there. So as far as they're concerned, there's no secrets anymore. The problem is just knowing what is their secrets, right? That's what they're not telling us. So that's the hard part. So yeah, I don't know. That I don't follow the influence of Freemasonry, be into the 20th century, because I don't see it. What I do see is I see the influence of fascism, and that is basically the network that's called the Fascist International. And regardless of what you call it, they are the architects of most of modern politics. That's really the key. Very important organization is a group called the Cercle.
What are they called again? I'm sorry.
The Circle, the Cercle in French.
Sure. Okay.
They're really the umbrella organization of all this stuff.
And interesting, and the French they would be tied in with the Russians as well. And the Russians, they call themselves Third Rome, and even the Masters of Jerusalem. Have you heard that?
Yes, I'm talking about it in my book. It's a very important concept. The Third Rome concept is core. That's the Russian mission. That's Dugin's and Putin's mission. It's also, this is where the synarchist idea comes from. They are trying to fulfill, because if you understand Synarchism, it's based on contact with the other world, right? The contact with spirits, who then provide you. It's just like the apocalypse, right? That's why the book of Revelation is considered so important, because it's a mystical revelation. All these books, all these concepts are all revelations. I think that's what the original term apocalypse means anyway. It means like a revelation. So it's believed to represent contact with the world beyond, and providing visions and predictions of the future, which provides them a blueprint that they can follow. So the most important mystical vision in modern times is the Fatima revelations. And so one of the key Fatima revelations is the consecration of Russia. So basically, this is kind of what they are working for. So when you look at all the synarchists who are involved in the spread of these concepts, so there's two guys that are particularly important that I discuss at length in my book. One of them is Raymond Abellio. He's like a Gnostic expert in the Cathars, fascist, collaborator with the Vichy regime, but he's also a friend with the founder of Antoine Pinet, who's the founder of the sect. And so him and his protege is a guy named Jean Parvulescu, who was a Romanian-born French author. And these are the guys who are mainly responsible for the promotion of. They are the key influence behind the Priory of Zion mythology. So all these guys are part of this like synarchist network that believes in the third Rome, the fulfillment of the prophecies of Nostradamus, and what they call the Grand Monarch. So they believe that Putin is the Grand Monarch. So Jean Parvulescu's most important disciple today alive is Alexander Dugin. So this is how, if you read Dugin's books, this is what he's trying to orchestrate. He believes, this is why these guys basically believe that Putin is like semi-divine. They believe that he's the Grand Monarch prophesied by Nostradamus.
It's interesting that if we look through history, I researched into past messiahs, and they were always tied to an emperor or a conqueror. You had Alexander the Great. He was consecrated as son of God, the son of God Amon, right, by the Amon priest in the Egyptian desert.
Yeah,
and then we had
with the Great.
Yeah, and then later we had Augustus Caesar, the son of God, right, Julius's father. Yep. And it's interesting, when he came to rule, Rome at that time, that's when the calendar had changed and they conquered Greece and Egypt, right? Exactly. So he essentially became the king of the world. Yeah. And a lot of people don't understand that, and that he was considered a messiah as well for a long time. Yeah. So it seems like from then we kind of go into the area of chaos for what we're going to 2,000 plus years. Yeah. And now it seems like they have got to the end of Solomon's temple, right? So figuratively, Solomon's temple is building the world, right? Over the world.
I mean, you're bringing up an important point, because really it's the third temple they're trying to build. And this is where Trump comes in
which they've already started, right? Or right. They haven't started. They moved an embassy there.
That's the start.
Correct.
So this is why, like, no president in modern time has acted more easily in favor and with as little obstruction as Donald Trump. And this is why, it's not only the evangelicals think that he's a potential messiah, but there's Jewish or right-wing Orthodox Jews who believe that he's they're not Orthodox Jews, sorry, but they're right-wing Zionist Jews who also think that Trump is like a Cyrus figure. Cyrus the Great, by the way.
Sure, but in reality, the Cyrus would be more like Putin, and then Trump would be...
They're both considered simultaneously to be, like heralds.
Gotcha.
Right? Just like Cyrus was the one who allowed the Jews to return to Palestine, but they could rebuild the temple. So Trump is kind of seen as like a Cyrus figure. And that's why you hear like most of these people, they actually think that Mike Pompeo actually admitted the other day that he thinks that Trump could possibly be a Messiah figure, and the guy's Secretary of State.
Yeah, and you look at his name, Pompey. It's interesting, right?
True enough, yeah.
Like history is repeating itself.
Yeah.
So the order would be Russia being consecrated, Third Rome. Everybody knows around the world, hey, we're in charge of the whole globe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. You know, I can see where the paths are. I follow the paths, but I'm not sure where they're leading to. So I'm not sure exactly how it all's supposed to work. But I mean, really, at the core of it is Israel. That's fundamentally it. You know, for the third temple is like the most fundamental prophecy or action that has to take place for, you know, the fulfillment of history. This third temple has been the most important central, you know, aspiration of the Jewish people for 2,000 years now. And in particular, the Zionists.
And you believe that will happen in the next decade,
Oh, I have no idea. All we can see is what they're working towards. You know, I don't know when it's going to happen, because you know these things they've been working on this. You know, it could have happened, and they thought it was going to happen in 1666, right? In 1666, when Shabbatai Zvi announced himself Messiah, the Jews, half the world's Jewish population believed in him. And then they were expecting that the Red Jews or the lost tribes of Israel were going to come forth from Central Asia to assist them in their conquest of the world. It didn't happen, of course. So you know these prophecies are, you know, a never-ending project. It seems like.
Yeah, they're moldable, right? Okay, what else did you want to cover today? I mean, we covered definitely a lot here.
Yeah.
Let me see here. What about the magic? Let's just touch a little bit about that before we go. How magic and the occultists play in it. From, you know, we talked a little bit about the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. You have Anton Wilson, I know, as well. You have all these guys, Aleister Crowley. How are these guys chosen to be involved in this? Is it because they're occultists and they're chosen to be kind of like jesters?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that idea of jesters, because that's another thread that I follow, is sort of the history of sorry if this sounds like I'm going way off track, but it's central, is the history of the Saturnalia, the history of carnivals. That really begins with Francis Bacon. He's, you know, who's actually probably the true author of Shakespeare's plays. And there's so many things. Basically, it's the idea of comedy and the idea of the jester. So Shakespeare is really the one who popularized that. The jester is the one, supposedly he's the clown, and because he's a clown, he's only joking, supposedly. He's the only one who can dare to mock the king, right? And that basically is the heart of this whole attitude. And that idea really becomes popular in modern times, particularly with people like Carrie Thornley and the founder of Discordianism. So that's really how that idea, you know, what's very interesting is important is that the group around which, you know, Albert Pike and people like Judah P. Benjamin, you know, sort of conspired to create the Civil War, were members of this group called the Mystic Crew of Comus, and they're one of the groups that organized the Mardi Gras and Carnival. It's basically it's a revival of the Saturnalia, which is an ancient carnival that involves human sacrifice that goes all the way back to Babylon. So, which could tie in, of course, to it's the killing of the sacred king, right? This is like the central ritual. This is all explained in James Fraser's Golden Bough. So Carrie Thornley was one of the conspirators in the assassination of JFK. He was also buddies with Robert Anton Wilson and the founder of Discordianism. So now Discordianism is very much the root of the whole very much the alt-right movement, the sort of like the online movement that or meme warfare, as they call it, right? So that's really the modern manifestation of the strategies that have been used to propel Trump to office. So we're talking about chaos magic. If we're talking about Discordianism fundamentally, which is rooted in the concept of the jester, the clown, and very much in a lot of ways, Trump is the ultimate clown. And I think that in a way he is he is the true lord of chaos, right? An Antichrist is probably going to be a buffoon and a joker and a mischievous clown. That's kind of where we've arrived.
Yeah, and that's actually what you reminded me right then when you had said that, the Antichrist. Let's talk about that. What is the purpose? We hear about, as far as the book of St. John, the Revelation of St. John, we have the arrival of the Antichrist, and then that's followed up with the Messiah. And we recently, I put an article on my blog. It was about 2 months ago. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church said that the Antichrist was going to head the world from the World Wide Web, which was an interesting kind of statement. And you hear this a lot coming, from the leaders of the churches, and then you have the Pope. I mean, the whole time since he's been the Pope, he's been talking about Satan. Hey, he's a real person. He's here, and he's really intelligent. He'll make your head spin.
Right.
What are they bringing forth, in your opinion? What is the purpose of the Antichrist?
The Lucifer's purpose of the Antichrist is a mirror image of God's plan, an inverse image of God's plan. So it's basically a world prison that he duped humans into building for themselves, constructing their own enslavement, creating a reverse image of a depraved dictator, conducting a world that operates on selfishness and magic, pretty much.
You just described our world right now. So all they need is a leader to take the helm, right?
Exactly.
And we did it ourselves, pretty much. Yeah, even though right. I get we're talking about all the players here and all the different factions and all these different groups, but when I look back, we all have this liberty and this, to follow free choice. Yeah, and I trace this back to the god Liber, and I know they did this in Rome, and essentially it was for the slaves, as they would have Liber, they could worship Liber, and this was a kind of a secret god. And my understanding, that God comes from within, and it's more of like a parasite within us. And if we follow that God, and they talk about it in the Bible, hey, the devil rules the world. Yeah. If we follow this God that rules the world, which is within of all of us, right? They talk about that. We're going to
succumbing to our own. Yeah, it's succumbing to our own weaknesses. I mean, that's the key. Is it's free will. When no one's forcing us, but sure. we know what is right and wrong fundamentally, but we're easily tempted, and that's why it takes a fortitude to resist temptation to do what's right, and that's what people are failing at.
Yeah, and it seems like the biggest test is going on right now, and it's going to continue. Where is the best place that people can find your book, David?
The best place for now is to both my book's not out yet, so I'm trying to find the time and the resources to finally publish it. I'm getting some help with some editing. I think I'm finally done, so hopefully sometime soon I'll actually have it in paper form and hopefully ebook form. But best way to keep track of me is my website, which is conspiracyschool.com. But I'm most active on my Facebook page, and there's a link to that from my website.
Yeah, I'll be sure to put a link on the Gnostic Warrior webpage for the podcast, David. It's a pleasure talking to you. I'm going to definitely go through the book. I know you had sent me a Word file. It's What is it, like 1,200 pages or more than that?
It's at least that. I'm embarrassed to say, it's huge.
Yeah, and it's needed because this is a lot of different research. And I was looking through the table of contents, and I want to just kind of give people a primer of what is here. Literally, just the table of contents is like 30 pages.
Right.
So, I'm just going to just say this real quick here. No one ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this starts out, folks, basically the introduction, he talks about secular democracy, the next section, New World Order, the Great Work, the end of the world, world powers. You get into the Kabbalah, the Book of Revelation, the Dying God, the Chaldean Magi, all the great subjects, the Essenes, Gnosticism. You cover Gog and Magog in the second chapter. You talk about Holy Blood, the Knights Templar, Sangreal, that's Holy Blood in French, right?
Yeah, it's right. It's royal blood, yeah.
Okay. The Order of the Temple, Baphomet, pretty much covering it all. Yeah, I look forward to looking through this definitely and check out David's work, people. He's definitely one of my favorite researchers. There's only a certain amount of attention that we can give ourselves out there. And I recommend, if you're looking at the conspiracy stuff, that you check out David and you give him a shot, because he has all this great research that he could share with you. And it's some of the best out there. So thank you again, David, for your time, and I wish you the best.
Great. Thanks. Always a pleasure, Mo.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. Take care. Bye.